To you say hello back to me. So first of all, the word Claytly Tene, which you will be hearing at the college, we always do land acknowledgements or a traditional welcome, welcoming people to our territories, of course. And so, of course, I'm sorry we should have had it written up for you, but you'll find that out. So Claytly means where the two rivers join together, the Nechako and the Fraser rivers. Tene is of the people. And so in saying that, I'm going to give you a traditional welcome. So you're all sitting in front of your screens here. And so you need to participate. So the first thing, of course, it's a Thursday morning. And probably a lot of you have just arrived in the last week or so. So I'm sure you're having an interesting experience as we are coming into spring, into the warmer weather. So the first thing I want you to do is get nice and comfortable in your chair. Feel that your weight is distributed, even that you are supported by your chair. I want you to take a nice deep cleansing breath throughout your whole body. Nice deep cleansing breath. So as we breathe into our body, that's one thing that we kind of forget about. It's about self-care. Breath. We were given breath the first day that we were born here on this earth plane. And we never stopped breathing for 70, 80 years. And what would you call that? You would call it a miracle. Each and every one of you are a miracle, meant to be here. And we come here to be in service. And we come here to have a focus on what we need to do in our lifetime. And of course, that changes. Our path always changes as we get older. So as we breathe into our body, we connect to a deeper part of ourselves. And if we were outside early this morning, we would face the east direction. And why would we do that? Well, because the sun always rises in the east direction. Gives us a new day, a new beginning, and new possibilities. And this is what we're grateful for. So we need to start our day in a good way by acknowledging and giving thanks for what Creator or whatever your belief system believes in what we have been given. And we honor, of course, Mother Earth. And why do we do that? Because she sustains our life here on this earth plane, giving us everything we need: housing, clothes, food. And so we need to also realize what we're in gratitude for. You know, in this chaotic world that is full of ups and downs, and it actually is broken right now. And we together need to create a space to make it better for everybody. So as we breathe into our body, connecting to that special place within, we remember that we need to do self-care first and foremost. And with you being new international students to a new country, Canada, and a new experience in your education, you need to do self-care, you know, because I'm sure you're ungrounded and don't know exactly what direction you're going to. But if you stand, like if we were outside and is in the east direction, we start to see the sun come up. We know that life will be good. And then we take that deep breath all the way down into our feet. And then we can feel our feet sink into the deep, rich soil of Mother Earth. You can smell the richness of her soil. And there she grounds us into today, into this very moment, to what is taking place. And so even maybe if the language is not understood fully, or you're not understanding what's going on, this too shall unfold and you will have an understanding. So don't put pressure on yourself that you have to know everything now, because you don't. It's a matter of you're having a life experience right now, and you focus on that. Focus on your support system. And we know that everything's going to be okay, so not to worry. So now in saying that, just remember self-care and ask questions. So I'm going to give you a traditional welcome to our traditional territories here in Prince George. We, the Clayton Nation, have been on our traditional lands over 9,000 years. It's supported by lithic evidence. The changes have taken place over thousands of years, supports the enduring strength, courage, and fortitude of our peoples. Our governance through the Batlots brought balance and harmony with our brothers and sisters of other First Nations people. Clayton clans are Frog, Wasiliu, Grouse, Utsut, Beaver, Saw, and Bear Sus. Through this system, we know who our family connections are. If you were, say, in England and your last name was Smith, you could have 5,000-6,000 people with the last name of Smith, maybe even more. But do they know if they're related to each other? I don't think so, and probably they're not. But through our clan system, it's very simplistic, but we know who our family connections are just through the clan system. And you will be learning this more if you're in Aboriginal studies. Through our oral history, the use of legends told of our travels, our hunting and fishing territories, our trading practices with all peoples. May remember and hold steadfast on what Creator's blessed us with, and that is our traditional territories. Our ancestors have always welcomed people to our territories. On behalf of Clayton elders, our youth, community members, and chief and council, it is absolutely our honor to welcome each and every one of you to our traditional territories. All my relations must see. So when I say all my relations, really, in fact, we are all connected with each other. You know, we might come from different countries, have different cultures, but ultimately, universal law says we're all connected. And that goes with Mother Earth and all that she supplies to us. We're connected to the beautiful trees. And why are we connected to the beautiful trees? Because we're so intimately connected with the trees. We breathe out, they breathe in. They breathe out, we breathe in. So they produce the oxygen that we need. So if that's not an intimate connection, I don't know what is. And of course, you know, all the animals and all the beauty in this earth, that's where we get our energy from, is from this beautiful earth that we live on. And we need to take care of it. So now, if Sue can put the map up. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our nation, the Clayton Nation. And as you can see on the map there, you can see where Prince George is, Vanderhoof, Tumbler Ridge, McBride, Valemont, Quesnel. In that black area, within that black area, is our traditional lands. They're unceded and they're ancestral. So our traditional territory stretches over 4.3 million hectares. All in that area is 4.3 million hectares, from the Rocky Mountains to the beautiful interior plateau, including the city of Prince George. To understand the magnitude of the size, 1 hectare equals 2 acres of land, and the Clayton community occupies 4 Indian reserves totaling 675 hectares within and adjacent to the city of Prince George. So what do we mean by our traditional lands? And I'm sure from where you come, you do have your particular traditional lands also. So we, our people, have lived, hunted, and gathered since the time immemorial. We hunted for our food, trapped, fished the creeks and rivers for our fish, collected plants for medicinal and ceremonial purposes. Everything we needed to survive came from our traditional lands. So we are under the understanding, our First Nations people, that we are the caretakers of the earth. And within that territory, we are the caretakers. So we make sure that everything is in balance and harmony, that we don't overfish, we don't overhunt, we don't go in and destroy by taking things out of our territory and not replacing it. Because everything in this world needs to be reciprocal. You give 50% and you take 50%. That brings it into a balance. And the way the earth is going now, we have plundered and done horrible things to our beautiful Mother Earth, taking because of money, right? And so we need to understand that we need to look after our territories for this future 7 generations, for your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. And very well could be that you, after your education at the college, you may also apply for your landed immigrant. So not only are we responsible for our area, you then will become responsible for our area also, because you come as guests into our traditional territories, and we welcome you as guests. And therefore you need to also, look after it, recycle, and, don't buy for the sake of buying and then throwing it away. We look at our oceans and see how polluted and how people have dumped so much. I mean, it's like a little land where they've dumped all the plastics and garbage in the ocean. And then where do we consider the mammals and the fish and whatever life we have underneath the water? Everything on this earth is for a reason, and it's for a balance, and that the ocean also is our food source, right? And so we need to look after that also. We've been really having issues in our area with our salmon. The salmon migrate up the Fraser River, up into the north area here to do their spawning, to give birth to new salmon. Excuse me. And as the salmon do that, they also give up their lives. And so therefore, because they've been so overfished in the ocean coming into the fresh water, and then of course with the climate change, it has been a devastation on our food supply. And now I remember my mother living on the reserve at Shelley, BC. And when she was a little girl, they would hear the salmon coming up the river to spawn. And she said there were so many salmon on the Fraser River, and you could hear them coming because their fins would whistle just above the water. You'd hear that whistling sound. And she said there were so many red salmon that you could literally walk across the backs of the salmon to the other side of the river. Well, today it's non-existent. You're lucky if you get so many salmon. And, we, as a community going up the river, have to really watch how much salmon we take, because, you've got your male and female. And in many years ago, going up to Port St. James, they would honor the fish coming they would know instinctively, they would know that the fish were coming, and they would come to the shore and they would drum and sing and welcome the salmon coming to spawn, because they honored their food source in the salmon. And also we did collective taking of the salmon. If one year there were more male salmon than there were female, we would harvest the male salmon and throw the female back in, and vice versa. If there were too many female salmon, we would harvest them. So, and we did it in what was called a weir, and where it was a basket that collected the salmon. And then we would make the decision on what needed to be put back into the water so that the continuation of the salmon life are always there. So that was a certain way of harvesting. And then you had the government come in and decide that this was against the law and that you could just put any salmon through. So they did not listen to our people who knew through tradition and thousands of years, this is how you maintained the salmon coming and spawning back into their grounds. So a little bit of history about the Claytley Tenay. We 2014 marks 100 years since our village which is now called Claytley Tenay Memorial Park. It was actually burnt down. You had the fur traders, the church, the Catholic Church, and the fur traders, Catholic Church, and well, I guess the leaders of the community at that time decided that this area was the best area to have their boats stop to pick up the the pelts, the animal pelts that they would trade and whatever else. And so of course they wanted to negotiate to buy this area. Well, the chief at that time went back to his community and said, you know, they want to buy this. And really in today's way of thinking money, it was like just pocket change. It was nothing to what the value was. So the chief came back and said, no, we're not giving up this particular piece of land because it's been with us for time immemorial. Well, the next thing you know, the village was burnt down. So the people had no place to go. And so then they moved us to Shelley, which is probably about 14 miles towards McBride. And you have to think over 100 years ago, and moving that far out of the urbanized area, which is Prince George, it would be like going 200 miles in bush. So the how we got there was actually through the river, or at that time they were starting to put the railway line in. So they put us on this piece of property, and but what was so interesting is they divided it by the Fraser River. So you had one side of the community on one side and the other on the other side. Well, again, the attitude is divide and conquer, because if you don't have a community all together supporting each other, then you've got two communities which will think differently because they're looking after their own community. So again, it was the federal government way of dissipating our First Nations people, you know, and along with many things that have happened to our nation, you know, the racism, the taking away of our innate that we already own. I guess I shouldn't say we own, because we were in balance with nature, with Mother Earth, and so therefore it created again another problem. So at one time our numbers were great. There's a hill in Prince George called Canot Hill, and it sits above the city, so you can look over the city. So then so then we had an elder say that at one time, when you looked in the evening, you could see these thousands of fires burning for as far as the eye could see. And this was our community, that they were, you know, living in this area. In approximately 1888, there was a smallpox epidemic, and this wiped out many of our people. So in my mom's lifetime, there was another epidemic which killed off more people. My mom was born in 1933 and remembers when she was a little girl before going to LeJac residential school, how her brothers and sisters got very sick. And not only, it was the whole community and all the children got sick. And so my grandmother, who probably was a healer in her way of being, nursed them back to health. But in nursing her children back to health, and other children died within the community, she was resented, because her children lived and some other children died within the community. So today, the numbers were very high and then they dropped very low. And then today now, we now have about 725 members within our community. And there's about 200 plus that live on the reserve, and the rest will live out of community, either in Prince George or throughout Canada, Vancouver, So at one time, our governance system was under what we call the potlatch. And so and that was like a government system, the potlatch or batlats. And that's when all of the clans would come together and they would feast. They would feed, and it was considered like an AGM where they came together and they discussed business and relationship and everything else. Or if there was a death or a birth or anything of significance, they would call in the clans from all directions, and they would have what they would call a batlatch or potlatch. And so the host nation, or host clan, I should say, would buy all these gifts. There would be blankets, there would be sugar, there would be milk, there would be anything that was useful within the household. They would collect from the whole clan and buy this or create. And then when they had the potlatch come together, they would gift out. And why, you would say, why would they gift out? Because all these clans came to witness what would be taking place. Because remember, we were an oral speaking community. We did not write things down. So the witnesses became, if you had to write something on the paper as remembrance, that's what it would do. They would witness exactly what was taking place with regards to business or passing on of a kio, which is a plot of land within their area that they lived on. And so they would pass gift. We would gift to honor. So also too, when it was all said and done, and these potlatches or batlats sometimes could last like 24 hours, 48 hours, maybe a week, depending on what they were talking about. And so when it was all said and done, in say 6 months, 8 months, there was a little argument over maybe a piece of land that had to be transferred to one of their children, and somebody was disputing it. Well, they would call in the clans and say, what did you witness? And they would explain, and so it would settle everything peacefully. So, of course, the government set up reserves, which are places that they put our people on. And I just explained to you that we have 675 hectares of reserve land that we were put on. Now, my dad was, he's of European descent, and his grandfather came from Poland, Ukraine, way back when. and they came to the East Coast by boat, and then they would go across all the land to Alberta, which is the next province to BC, which you are living in. And they got 150 acres to start to homestead. And it was free land, but they would start their farms or whatever other businesses they were coming into. So here my grandfather, well, it would be my great-grandfather, he already had this land, so they would work it to create a life for themselves. Yet my mom here in British Columbia, whose family's been here for time immemorial, were stuck on pieces of land that they weren't allowed to leave. Now, what's wrong with that picture? You've got new people coming in and they have their freedom to pick whatever piece of land they want. And yet my mother, whose family's been here forever, got stuck on a reserve. Like it should have been the other way around. You have all these cultures coming in and creating a life for themselves, a positive life, and yet all the government could do was take away. So it was like you're standing in front of them with all your clothes on, and they start stripping you. They first take your jacket away, then they take your hat away, and then your shoes away. So all the things that were a natural way of living in our country, they were taking away, so that we had no authority, no choice. We had to live by their colonialistic rules. And so pretty soon you're standing there naked. And that's what happened to our people. We were standing there naked because we had absolutely nothing, as the government took everything away from us, including our children. At 5 years old, they would take them away and put them in a residential school that was run usually by the federal government and the Catholic Church, or many other churches after a while. So these poor children did not know how to speak English. All they knew is their carrier language. And every time they opened their mouth to speak their language, they got beaten or hit. Now what if you were 5 years old and they took you away from your mom and dad, and they put you into a strange country or a school that you did not know the language, you did not know how to act or dress or speak or whatever, and you're 5 years old, you're still a baby, and you get a slap for saying a word in your language, and you couldn't talk to your brother and sister, and they segregated the females to the males. So they did not allow you to, if I had a brother, I couldn't speak to my brother. So these children endured residential school, and basically it was kind of like a work camp, because it said it was a school to teach them. But what it taught them was that they were dirt, that they were worthless, that they were not smart, that they, it goes on and on and on. And you spent probably until you were 15 years old in these schools. The Catholic Church actually got paid quarterly for how many children were put into the residential school. And my mother and her family went to what is called the Jack Residential School, which is probably about 200 miles away from Prince George. And sometimes they were lucky to get home by Christmas for a little visit, or sometimes they didn't even come home during the summer for whatever reasons. And so can you just imagine the trials and tribulations those poor children went to? And you'll find, if you're going into Aboriginal studies, you'll find out more details, and the details are not pretty at all. And then we had Sir John A. Macdonald, who was a premier at that time. And his idea, because of course they wanted the First Nations land right across Canada, so they have to make excuses like, like England was the colonizer, colonized many different countries besides Canada, India, Jamaica, like it goes on and on. So his idea was take the Indian out of the child, and that's what they were trying to do with the residential school, and thus solve what was referred to as the Indian problem. And Indianness was not to be tolerated, rather it must be eliminated. So if they could not blend the Indian people in with the white people, then they were going to get rid of them. They were going to kill them. And then we have Duncan Campbell Scott. And what was the objectives of the schools? Why would we put them in? So this quote, he was a deputy superintendent, Scott oversaw the assimilation of the Indian residential school system for Aboriginal children, and stating his goal was to get rid of the Indian problem. So we've been dealing with this for like 150 years. And it's just an ongoing issue. Like right now in the college, for the past probably 3 or 4 years, we're trying to indigenize all the programs within the college and the university out in community. And you know how hard that is? Because if we are treated the same as everybody else in this country, then they will have to acknowledge that we are the original people of this land. And secondly is they would have to understand that they have to start giving back, because remember that the government took our forest, we mined, took all this stuff. They made billions of dollars. And what did we get? We didn't get anything other than to be slapped down even further. And so nowadays, our communities have been very strong. They're standing on their feet, and they are demanding from the government that they need to be reciprocal of, if you take down a tree, because it's called stumpage, that some of that money has to go to us, or mining, some of that money has to come back to us. So there's so many, the Indian Act is still alive and well, because you're not considered an Indian not unless you have what they call a status card that says that you're an Indian. And sometimes these status cards will get outdated, and then all of a sudden you're not an Indian anymore. Well, how ridiculous is that? But that's the government for you. So a few of the things that the Indian Act did was it denied women's status. And this is right across the whole of our world, is that the status of women are always below the status of man. And what's wrong with that problem? It should be in balance. Women are balanced with men and vice versa. And so when they took the women's status away, which happened to my mother, when she married my dad, she lost her status, and they said, you're no longer an Indian, which again does not make sense. They gave her $20. So then they and what happened was, if an Indian man married a white woman, she automatically got status, which was got whatever he was allowed through the federal government. But when an Indian woman married a man, it got taken away. So that in the 80s, there became a new law, C-31, which reinstated the woman, and she got her status back, and her children would therefore have status. And when we talk about a status card, it's not a privilege, it is a right. And a lot of people say, oh, well, you're going to get free this, free that. Yeah, right. It's not like that. They, of course, also introduced the residential schools. They created reserves. And because they couldn't say the people's name in Carrier, they decided, the church and the government decided to change their names to European names so they could understand it, because they couldn't speak the language, of course, or even say the names for that matter. And but this is an interesting fact and it really bothers me. But anyways, they had what they called Indian agents at that time. And these Indian agents were just some dumb bloke down the street, white guy down the street. And he decided, okay, he's going to be the boss of this reserve. And they put him as an Indian agent. And if one of our men needed to go and get food, whether it be fishing in a different territory, or if they went to hunt for moose or deer, bear, he would have to go to the Indian agent and ask permission to leave the reserve in order to go hunting to get food for his family. And they would give him a little pass that you are allowed to leave for 2 weeks. And if you're not back on a certain day and you come back, they're going to put you in jail for a certain length of time. And that's how ridiculous that control was. They controlled everything. So, and also, if our men went to fight in World War I or II, they were basically disenfranchised, which means that when they came back from the war, they weren't, number one, they were not honored for what they did for our country. And number two is that we're not allowed back on the reserve. So that's the thanks they got for fighting for the country. The First Nations weren't allowed to form any political organizations, because that would give them strength of power in coming together. So of course we can't allow our people to do that. And it also prohibited sale of ammunition for the First Nations. They weren't allowed guns and bullets. I wonder why. And then we ran traditionally through what we call traditional chiefs. And then when the federal government came in, they decided to put us as a band council. So we had to elect a chief and council, which then, of course, separates more because you cause dissension within your community. And they were forbidden to practice their way of spiritual belief system. And that was taken away from them because, it was deemed, I don't know, evil maybe, because it was a traditional way that we did our spiritual connection to Creator. And then we were denied the right to vote. And I think it was in 1962 was when we were allowed to vote. Now we are the original people of this land, and everybody else are basically importers, they're guests to basically all the traditional territories within Canada. And you know that if we had a farm and grew product, that we weren't allowed to sell it. To make money to buy whatever else we needed. And so there is so much that you're going to learn, and it would do you good to make the effort to understand the true history of Canada, and not what's sometimes said in books, okay? But it needs you to take the responsibility and learn this yourself. Like, instead of saying, I get a lot of people saying, well, why do they do this, or why do they do that, or why? And why are you asking me when we have Google that you can check out, right? Or you could even phone actually the band office and find out. But here there was it's called Lament for Confederation. And this is by Chief Dan George, who said this in 1967. When I fought to protect my land and my home, I was called a savage. When I neither understood nor welcomed his way of life, I was called lazy. When I tried to rule my people, I was stripped of my authority. And that's exactly what happened to our people. But today we're growing, we're thriving, we're economically feasible, and life is pretty good. I mean, we still face racism, but you know, those are ingrained biases that have come from generations past. And a lot of times, you know, when you make a comment on a different culture, a different color, or a different way of speaking, you have to understand your biases, what your parents said, or your grandparents, or your great grandparents said. But before anything comes out of your mouth, you must hone it in, bring it back to you, and question yourself. Why am I saying that? Why am I thinking that? So it becomes an individual responsibility to make sure that you are in balance and harmony and build relationships with those around you. And I think I'm just about going over time here. Anyways, yeah. So I think probably it's a good start, and hopefully you understood what I said. If you don't, we're in the Aboriginal Resource Center and you can come and ask us. We're right next to International. We're buddies with the next group of people next to us. So in saying that, I wish you the best educational experience coming to our country, and be a part of it in a good way, right? Because you really are invited guests that we're welcoming you. So thank you. All my relations, Natalia. Thank you.
Oh, Darlene, thank you very much. That was a beautiful presentation, as usual. Like speaking for myself, I learn every time you present, and sometimes I learn things that are horrific. But anyway, thank you very much. And if anybody has any questions, please ask them. Darlene is here. She's generous and she knows so much, and she can help you, guide you, and please ask some questions of her. Anybody? And if you're feeling shy, please put them in the chat. We'll certainly can read them out. And any other questions as well, that would be great. I'm just going to stop the recording now. So